Prisons are designed to strip away freedom, isolate danger, and enforce order. But history has shown that when human beings are confined under pressure, new systems of power inevitably form. In the darkest corners of maximum security facilities across the world, alliances were forged not for survival alone, but for control. What began as protection soon evolved into something far more organized, far more violent, and far more enduring. This is a story of how some of the deadliest prison gangs on Earth came into existence, groups that turned cell blocks into battlefields and transformed incarceration into an extension of organized crime. Before we go any deeper, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications. These stories don't get told anywhere else, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And it starts with a brotherhood born behind concrete walls in Scandinavia, the Wolf Pack of Sweden. On May 27, 1995, inside Kumla Prison, Sweden's most secure correctional facility, a group of hardened inmates formed an alliance that would reshape the country's criminal underworld. They called themselves Brödraskapet, meaning the Brotherhood. To outsiders, they would later become known by another name, the Wolf Pack. Unlike many gangs that recruited on the streets and carried their identity into prison, this group was born inside the system. Membership wasn't open to just anyone. To even be considered, an inmate had to be serving time in a high-security prison. But the real test went deeper. Prospective members were expected to reject rehabilitation programs outright. Cooperation with authorities, even in the form of routine drug testing, was forbidden. Candidates had to provide legal documentation proving they were not informants. In short, joining the Brotherhood required a total rejection of the system designed to reform them. This was not just a gang. It was a statement. If this already sounds disturbing, tap the like button. It tells the algorithm to push this story to more people who want real, uncensored crime history. The Brotherhood quickly gained a reputation for discipline and secrecy. Many of its members were serving sentences for armed robbery, large-scale drug offenses, and murder. Loyalty wasn't symbolic, it was enforced. Leadership shifted over time, but the rules remained rigid: contribute value, or you were disposable. That philosophy became brutally clear in 1998. One of the Brotherhood's founding members was released from prison. Only months later, he was ambushed and killed in what authorities believed was a calculated move by rival criminals connected to an international motorcycle club. The assassination didn't weaken the Brotherhood, it ignited it. What followed was a long, bloody rivalry that spilled beyond prison walls and into Sweden's streets. Retaliation became policy. Chapters of the Brotherhood began appearing across the country, operating both inside correctional facilities and in the outside criminal economy. Drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, organized robberies. Despite repeated crackdowns, the Brotherhood endured, adapting its structure, replacing leaders, and continuing recruitment. Over time, status within the gang became less about seniority and more about usefulness. Comment below. Were you aware Sweden had prison gangs this extreme? Or does this surprise you? Authorities struggled to track their true size. What made the situation even more disturbing was evidence suggesting recruitment of teenagers, exploiting the fact that juvenile sentences in Sweden were significantly lighter. The Brotherhood had evolved from a prison alliance into a decentralized criminal network. And they were just the beginning. LAEME, power through fear. Nearly 4 decades earlier and an ocean away, another group was taking shape inside a California prison, one that would become one of the most powerful criminal organizations in American history. In 1957, at the Jewel Vocational Institution, 13 inmates formed what they believed was a necessary defense against racial violence behind bars. They called themselves LAEM, also known as the Mexican Mafia. At first, the mission was protection. But unity quickly turned into influence, and influence turned into power. As members were transferred between facilities, LAEM's reach expanded. Soon, street gangs outside prison were paying tribute to leaders behind bars. Orders moved through coded letters, visits, and eventually contraband cell phones. Joining LAEM required years of loyalty, strict obedience, and act that proved commitment beyond words. Once inside, there was no leaving. If you're still watching at this point, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Subscribe now, because the next chapters get even darker. By the early 21st century, authorities estimated hundreds of full members incarcerated at any given time, with tens of thousands of associates operating on the streets. Even under extreme isolation, Laim continued to function. They had mastered something terrifying, criminal continuity. But power like that attracts challenges. Violence is identity. If Laim represented calculated control, another prison gang became infamous for something else entirely: unrestrained brutality. Formed in the 1960s at San Quentin State Prison, the Aryan Brotherhood began as a racial alliance and evolved into one of the most violent prison gangs ever documented. Despite making up a tiny fraction of inmates, members were responsible for a shocking number of prison murders. Violence wasn't a tool, it was a language. Initiations demanded blood. Loyalty was enforced through fear, and defiance was answered with death. Pause for a second and ask yourself, could anyone truly survive inside a system like this without choosing a side? Leadership structures extended nationwide. On the streets, affiliates handled drugs, weapons, and contract killings. Even intense federal pressure couldn't erase the organization. It only forced it to adapt. Where fear ruled, influence followed. And where influence existed, new gangs were waiting to rise. The next generation. Younger inmates began forming groups inspired by the giants before them, sometimes as allies, sometimes as tools. These gangs learned fast. They adopted symbols, codes, and systems of punishment. Prison didn't end criminal ambition. It refined it. If this story has kept you watching so far, hit like right now. It massively helps the channel grow and brings you part 2 faster. By the time authorities realized the full scope of these organizations, the damage was already done. These gangs weren't confined to prisons anymore. They were embedded in neighborhoods, controlling territory and shaping entire criminal ecosystems. And the violence was only escalating. Prison gangs do not forgive. They do not forget, and they never let blood go unpaid. By the time the First Brotherhood solidified their power behind bars, violence had already become currency. Respect was earned through brutality. Loyalty was proven through suffering. And betrayal, real or imagined, was answered with a level of revenge that most people could barely comprehend. In this chapter, the story shifts from formation to escalation. Because once these gangs established control, the next phase was inevitable: war, when revenge becomes a message. In the late 1970s, inside Puerto Rico's Oso Blanco maximum security prison, a group of inmates formed what they believed was a movement rooted in protection and dignity. They called themselves the Nitas Association. Unlike many prison gangs driven purely by profit, the Nitas were initially built around ideology. Many early members were political prisoners, men who believed the prison system itself was oppressive and corrupt. Their founder, Carlos Torres Iriart, was widely respected for his refusal to allow the group to engage in drug trafficking. That decision would cost him his life. Rival gangs saw opportunity where Iriart saw principle. In 1981, with the alleged help of corrupt correctional officers, Iriart was ambushed while returning to his cell. He was stabbed and shot, dying inside the prison he had tried to reform from within. His death sent shockwaves through the inmate population. What followed was not grief. It was vengeance. A riot erupted, order collapsed, and somewhere inside that chaos, the Nitas made a decision that would cement their reputation forever. They targeted the leader of a rival gang known as G27. According to multiple accounts, Nitas members broke into his cell, stabbed him repeatedly well over 100 times before dismembering his body. What happened next crossed a psychological line few gangs had ever dared to cross. Pieces of the body were allegedly mailed to the victim's family. This wasn't just revenge. It was a warning. At this point, take a second and comment below. Do you think acts like this are about justice or pure terror? From that moment on, the Nitas were feared not just in Puerto Rico, but far beyond it, exporting violence across borders. By the 1990s, the Nitas had expanded internationally. Members surfaced in prisons across the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe. Each chapter operated with a structured hierarchy: president, vice president, treasurer, disciplinarian, and coordinator positions decided by internal votes. On paper, it looked organized, civilized, even. In reality, discipline was enforced with brutality. Drug trafficking became the gang's primary source of income, drawing them into conflict with powerful street gangs like the Latin Kings, MST, and the Bloods and Crips. Each alliance and rivalry added new names to a growing list of the dead. Eventually, law enforcement caught up. In 2019, dozens of high-ranking NITA's members were convicted on major charges, effectively crippling the organization's ability to compete on a large scale. But like many prison gangs, the damage had already been done. The NITAs had proven something terrifying. A prison gang could operate like a multinational organization. And elsewhere, another war was already burning, one that would last generations. A war over territory and pride. California's prison system became the stage for one of the longest-running gang wars in American history. On one side stood the Mexican Mafia. On the other, a rival born from regional identity and resentment, La Nuestra Familia, often referred to simply as NF. Founded in the mid-1960s at Soledad State Prison, La Nuestra Familia began as a defensive response. Northern California inmates believed they were being marginalized and exploited by LAIM, whose leadership largely came from Southern California. At first, tensions simmered quietly. Then, in 1965, a seemingly minor incident ignited decades of bloodshed. A pair of shoes was stolen. That theft, insignificant to outsiders, was seen as an unforgivable act of disrespect. In the culture of prison gangs, disrespect is an invitation to violence. Killings followed. Retaliations escalated. And soon, every prison yard became a potential battlefield. NF rejected centralized leadership, instead relying on a council of senior members, most of whom were serving life sentences. Orders moved through coded messages, trusted intermediaries, and family connections outside prison walls. Joining the gang required absolute commitment. Family, personal ambition, even survival instincts came second to loyalty. If you're still watching, hit the like button now. Stories like this get buried unless viewers push them forward. NF's criminal activities mirrored those of its rivals: drug trafficking, robbery, extortion, and murder. Methamphetamine became a major source of income, further intensifying conflict with both the Mexican Mafia and white supremacist gangs. Despite aggressive law enforcement efforts throughout the 1990s and 2000s, NF endured. The war never truly ended. It simply paused between outbreaks of violence, politics, power, and prison revolution. While some prison gangs were driven by profit or race, others were fueled by ideology. The Black Guerrilla Family, founded in 1966 inside San Quentin Prison, was one of the most politically motivated prison gangs ever formed. Inspired by the Black Power movement, the group described itself as a revolutionary organization fighting systemic oppression. Its stated goals included protecting black inmates, promoting political awareness, and most controversially overthrowing the U.S. government. At first, the movement attracted inmates seeking dignity and unity. Then, leadership was killed. In the early 1970s, two of the group's founders died in separate incidents involving correctional officers. One death, ruled a justifiable homicide, became a rallying cry. The ideological movement hardened into something more dangerous. Violence became a tool of resistance. Drug trafficking funded operations, and alliances shifted depending on necessity rather than belief. Rivalries, especially with white supremacist gangs, turned deadly. Prison yards across California saw repeated clashes, each incident deepening hatred and reinforcing loyalty. By the 21st century, BGF had expanded beyond California, with affiliates in states like Maryland. Investigations later revealed corruption that stunned the public. Correctional officers were implicated, some accused of smuggling contraband, others of forming personal relationships with gang members. Let that sink in for a moment. The system meant to control the gangs was being compromised from within. When indictments finally came, they exposed a truth many feared. Prison gangs had influence far beyond inmates. They had infiltrated the institutions themselves. No exit, no mercy. Across every gang in this story, whether ideological, racial, or profit-driven, one rule remained constant. There is no easy way out. Leaving a prison gang often requires disappearing entirely. New identities, witness protection, constant fear of retaliation. Even then, survival is never guaranteed. Some former members have spoken of living decades under assumed names, always watching their backs, knowing a single mistake could be fatal. Because for prison gangs, loyalty is permanent, and betrayal is punishable by death. By the time authorities understood the true scale of prison gangs, it was already too late. What began decades earlier as protection ideology, or survival had evolved into something far more dangerous, self-sustaining criminal ecosystems. These gangs no longer depended on individual leaders, single prisons, or even national borders. They adapted, they learned, and most importantly, they outlived every crackdown meant to destroy them. This final chapter reveals how prison gangs survive in the modern era and why, despite billions spent on enforcement, they may never truly disappear. The evolution of control. Prison was never supposed to be a place where crime could thrive. Yet over time, it became the perfect environment. Inmates were isolated, monitored, and stripped of resources, but that pressure created dependence. Protection had value. Connections had value. Violence became leverage. Gangs learned quickly that raw brutality alone wasn't enough. To survive long-term, they needed structure, communication, and money. So they adapted. Leadership structures shifted away from visible figureheads toward councils and layered command systems. If one leader was isolated or transferred, another could quietly take over. Orders were passed using coded letters, legal mail, family visits, and eventually technology. Contraband cell phones changed everything. With a phone, a leader in solitary confinement could run operations on the street. Drug shipments, extortion, contract hits. Entire criminal networks were coordinated from cells smaller than a parking space. If this revelation shocks you, hit the like button now. The more people who understand this reality, the harder it is to ignore. The business of incarceration. One uncomfortable truth often goes unspoken. Prison gangs thrive because the system itself creates demand. Overcrowding forces inmates together. Understaffing limits oversight. Long sentences remove hope. For many inmates, joining a gang isn't about ambition, it's about survival. Refuse affiliation, and you may be isolated, targeted, or denied access to basic necessities. Gangs control food, contraband, protection, and even conflict resolution within prison walls. In some facilities, gangs effectively replace governance. And outside prison, the consequences are just as severe. Street gangs pay taxes to prison-based organizations. Orders flow from inside to outside, blurring the line between incarceration and freedom. Arresting foot soldiers does little when leadership remains untouched behind bars. It's a system feeding itself. Recruitment, the next generation. One of the most disturbing evolutions of prison gangs is how early recruitment begins. In some countries, teenagers are targeted because penalties are lighter. In others, youth detention centers act as pipelines into adult prison gangs. Young offenders are groomed, tested, and conditioned long before they understand the full cost of loyalty. Violence becomes normalized, respect becomes transactional, and fear becomes identity. By the time these recruits enter adult prisons, they are already committed sometimes before they've even finished school. Pause here and comment, should prisons focus more on punishment or prevention? Because once recruitment is complete, escape becomes nearly impossible. The illusion of crackdowns. Governments respond the only way they know how. Raids, indictments, isolation, new supermax facilities. And for a while, it works. Leadership is removed. Communication slows. Violence drops. Then the cycle repeats. Gangs anticipate crackdowns. They plan for arrests. New leaders are groomed long before the old ones fall. Even mass indictments often remove visible figures while leaving the structure intact. Some organizations have survived for over half a century. That kind of longevity isn't accidental. It's strategic. Corruption from within. Perhaps the most unsettling factor in the survival of prison gangs is corruption. Over the years, investigations across multiple countries have revealed correctional officers smuggling drugs, weapons, phones, and messages. Some were coerced. Others were bribed. A few became emotionally or romantically involved with inmates. Once corruption enters the system, control collapses. Gangs gain access to intelligence. Transfers can be predicted. Searches avoided. Rivals targeted. The war between authority and criminal collapses, and rebuilding it becomes nearly impossible. If this feels like something out of a movie, remember, every example in this story is rooted in documented reality. Can anyone ever leave? Leaving a prison gang isn't resignation. It's betrayal. Some former members have escaped, but only by vanishing entirely. New identities, relocation, witness protection. Even then, fear never disappears. Others try to leave quietly and fail. Retaliation can come years later. A chance encounter, a recognized tattoo, a single phone call. For many, the gang is a lifetime sentence even after release. Why they still exist? So why, after decades of effort, do prison gangs still exist? Because they fill a vacuum. They provide structure where chaos exists, identity where isolation thrives, power where powerlessness dominates. As long as prisons remain overcrowded, underfunded, and focused solely on punishment, gangs will continue to recruit, adapt, and survive. The monster isn't just inside the walls. It's built into the system. The final truth: prison gangs aren't myths. They aren't relics of the past. And they aren't going away. They are living organizations evolving with technology, exploiting human weakness, and surviving every attempt to erase them. And while most people will never see the inside of a maximum security prison, the effects of these gangs reach far beyond the walls into neighborhoods, streets, and families worldwide. If this series opened your eyes, subscribe now. More real crime stories are coming, documented, researched, and told without fiction. Share this video with someone who thinks prison ends crime. Comment below which gang shocked you the most, because understanding the truth is the first step toward confronting it.